Sherlock Holmes is a persistent character, and I don't say this to be indicative of any personality trait or any kind of attribute. I mean that Sherlock Holmes as a concept has seen a lot of iterations. The BBC series that people seemingly only remember for the queer baiting, the time Iron Man pretended to be Sherlock Holmes for 2 movies, or the weird animated series that I thought was a hallucination until I was doing research for this video. Sherlock Holmes has seen a lot and been even more. But through all of his runs and adventures, 2 characters have persisted, following him wherever he goes. John Watson, Sherlock's loyal partner and the real main character of the original series, and Professor James Moriarty, Sherlock's greatest enemy and the subject of today's video. The final problem, while being only one of 2 physical appearances for the character in author Conan Doyle's original works, was more than enough for fans of the series at the time to latch on to him as Holmes's greatest enemy. Moriarty is portrayed in these stories as cunning and ruthless, often being referenced by Holmes as the most dangerous man in London. And this level of build-up was intentional on the part of Doyle, as Sherlock's encounter with Moriarty was intended to be his last, with both of the men presumably falling to their deaths during a one-on-one fight at the end of the story. And while this shared death would eventually be retconned to Sherlock winning the fight and being the sole survivor, the memory of Moriarty persisted as being the only man to push the world's greatest detectives to his limits, which is exactly why his inclusion in young Sherlock makes so much sense. Young Sherlock is, at the time of writing, the most recent iteration of the character. Taking inspiration from Andrew Lane's series of the same name, young Sherlock sets out to portray a much rougher and less refined version of Sherlock Holmes, shining a light on his development and giving a much more vulnerable look at the seemingly untouchable detective. There's a lot of aspects of the series that make it an interesting look into the psyche of Sherlock Holmes, but admittedly, this video isn't about him. No. Instead, I'm going to be pointing the finger at the character who I feel is the most interesting character in the series, the young James Moriarty. I feel as though the main draw of the series isn't really learning more about Sherlock's past, but more so examining the connection between him and James. The mysteries and conflicts presented over the course of the series are interesting, and Sherlock has a lot of good showings, but this is also an unusually close portrayal of these 2 characters who are normally at odds with one another. And in my personal experience of watching this show, that was the main thing that kept me invested. So without further ado, get comfortable, renew your Amazon Prime subscription, and let's embark on our study of James Moriarty in Young Sherlock. To fully understand Moriarty's portrayal in the series, we first need to understand what kind of person he presumably becomes in the future. Professor James Moriarty is described by Holmes as the greatest schemer of all time, his superior intellect mixing with his thirst for violence to create the strongest villain, supremely skilled at using his schemes to make deaths that look like accidents and even creating a cane that turns compressed air into bullets. The Moriarty of the future is impressive to say the least, and knowing what he becomes makes the Moriarty we see in young Sherlock even more eye-catching. Moriarty's introduction is one that serves to establish one of the main differences between him and Sherlock. Around halfway through episode 1, we find Sherlock stumped by an algebraic equation, which for the time was basically rocket science, and James, a student who stayed after class, steps up to the plate, presenting his own personal mathematic philosophy. If the numbers are imaginary, then all we have to do is make new numbers. Now, embracing the fact that algebra was basically rocket science back then, let's explore what this scene means for these 2 characters. Sherlock is a straightforward genius. He takes the problems presented to him head on and always tries to find the solution within the parameters, while James embraces the confusion and changes problems around himself to find a more favorable outcome, making new numbers, if you will. Think of Sherlock as the positive and James as the negative, as that's shockingly similar to how their dynamic develops in the future. Another aspect of James's character that I find very interesting and that's introduced in this episode is his capacity for violence. James is a capable combatant, and it's a part of his skill set that he takes pride in, falling in line with his chaotic thought process and allowing him to thrive in a variety of situations. For example, a brawl at a party or a fight against a criminal. Him teaching Sherlock how to fight could also be a bit of ironic foreshadowing foreshadowing, assuming we are to believe these two grow into the Sherlock and Moriarty from the original stories. The point here is that episode 1 goes to great lengths to establish differences between the pair that contributes to their chemistry as well as their developing rivalry. They're just as good as one another in different areas, and in James's case in particular, he sees Holmes as someone to be protected as he navigates the dangerous situations they find themselves in. He sees himself as more capable, in spite of Sherlock's ability to solve the problems put directly in front of them. And this is because James recognizes the chaos of the world they live in and thrives in that chaos. This is something that any attentive audience member can pick up on rather quickly, but as the series progresses and both men develop, James's seeds of darkness start to show themselves. But before that, I would like to leave a friendly reminder that if you're enjoying the video thus far, you should really like and subscribe. I've been releasing content a lot more frequently and a lot more consistently, as I'm really committed to the goal of hitting 10,000 subscribers before the end of the year. If you like what I do and you want to support me on that goal, any support, a like, a comment, a sub, would be greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's get back to the rest of the video. James sees the gritty world of young Sherlock as a game that's meant to be played, yet another difference between the pair that changes how they both engage with the cases presented to them. Towards the end of the first arc of the series, Sherlock is content taking the evidence he has to the police. Too many people have died already and the stakes are too high, but James, seeing an opportunity, pushes Sherlock to continue fighting for himself. Xuan, the Chinese princess killing these professors, has challenged Sherlock directly, and he would be remiss if he didn't take that challenge head on. Subtly encouraging Sherlock like this is the name of the game for Moriarty. He's okay taking the more supportive role in the narrative because Sherlock intrigues him and he wants to see how he handles this dark and violent world. Yes, people are dying. Yes, there's a chance you'll die too, but none of it means anything if you're not the one who wins in the end. This obsession with glory is the largest motivator for Moriarty as a character. Upon defeating Xuan, his first thought is the headlines that'll come from it, and towards the end of the series, it's made abundantly clear that defeating Silas means nothing to him if he can't take over what he's created. Moriarty, coming from a broken family and losing his college scholarship because of what was basically bad luck, is shifting his philosophy to match the world that scarred him, taking pleasure in the confusion and in particular being the one that has all of the answers in the middle of the confusion. Sherlock is a valuable partner for James because they challenge one another. James is a constant part of Sherlock's thought process, the one he bounces ideas off of, the one that sees the perspectives Sherlock can't, and apparently the only one that's allowed to engage with Sherlock's overactive imagination. Basically a domain expansion that acts as a space for his deductive reasoning. It's exactly this duality that keeps them close over the course of the narrative. When Sherlock is in suspicion of Silas and pushes James away out of denial, it's the reason he goes back and apologizes. At this point in both of their lives, they need each other, and they're both painfully aware of this in spite of their differences. But there's that word again, differences. The differences between these two are the reason why they develop so differently in spite of tackling the same conflicts, walking away with different answers from the same problems. The end of the series is the frontier on which these differences are put on full display, and we as the audience are finally allowed to see the birth of who will eventually become Professor James Moriarty. Embracing the bad situations which you were forced into for the sake of survival is not representative of any form of moral reprehension, nor should it be indicative of evil. Creating those situations, however, taking joy in the pain you inflict on others, is completely different. There's a line that sometimes comes up in stories of this nature, and a character's reaction to crossing that line can be what decides the direction of their character development for the remainder of their run. Mark from Invincible killed one person and was so fucked up about it that he didn't win a single fight for the entirety of the third season. Ken Kaneki locked in for one fight and then became every edgy 14-year-old's dream MC. But what about James Moriarty? How could someone seemingly so comfortable with the violence surrounding him possibly react to taking another human life? Well, we got our answer in episode 7. And it was pretty interesting. When regrouping with Xuan after she accidentally shot Sherlock, James has to kill a soldier in self-defense, and immediately upon killing the man, he stops in his tracks, almost frozen. This is the first and only time in the series that we see James so shocked. Normally, even in the most chaotic of situations, he's the one cracking jokes and feeling things out in his own way. But here, there's none of that, because he killed a man and he doesn't know how to feel, right? Well, kind of. It's really because he killed a man and he liked it. This is a turning point for James's character. the line has been crossed and the reaction has been cemented. Comfortable violence, now transitioning to being comfortable with full-blown murder. James Moriarty, internally at least, has stepped into the dark side. More differences between him and Sherlock are established here as well. Where Sherlock rejects Yuan, as some deeper moral part of him won't allow it, James sleeps with Beatrice, Sherlock's sister and at this point a major antagonist. He gives in to his lust and throws all caution to the wind, even proposing taking over Silas's project to Sherlock before shutting down his own idea and writing it off as a joke, of course stealing the ideas for himself anyway upon Silas's defeat. While Sherlock struggles with his problems externally, laying the foundation for the main conflict of the series, James is fighting a much different battle, trying to decide what kind of person he wants to be in this world, deciding whether he'll bend to the influence of Sherlock's virtue or otherwise take his own path, make his own numbers to make a name for himself and attain his own personal glory. It's this conflict that creates the backbone on which young Sherlock stands, adding a new layer of conflict to the series that the audience can pay attention to, ultimately giving a purpose to Moriarty as a character and spurring audience intrigue. James is an amazing character for all of these reasons, but one question remains that I was forced to ask myself over the course of young Sherlock's run. Is he a good Moriarty? James as a character is arguably one of the most impressive parts of young Sherlock. Moriarty has existed as a concept for generations, but admittedly, Doyle himself merely saw Moriarty as a final boss fight of sorts, with the majority of his development in future series being original from the part of other writers. This makes developing Moriarty interesting from the perspective of accuracy. You have to take an essentially new character and mold them into the villain from the original tales while making them interesting enough to where the development feels natural and reasonable from his perspective. In a vacuum, this Moriarty is an amazing character. Individually, he has one of the best and freest performances in the series, and his dynamic with Sherlock is one of the most entertaining aspects of the series as well. You see a lot of Moriarty in young Sherlock, and even without the mythos to reference, he stands on his own quite well, but the original work adds an even more impressive layer to his character. Knowing what he becomes makes him an even more enthralling protagonist, as you're constantly trying to see where it all went wrong, how the differences between him and Sherlock were so amplified that they ended up going down polar opposite routes in life. James in young Sherlock represents an alternate route for Holmes, someone on his level with his intelligence taking a polar opposite route because of the conditions of his life. This dynamic is the crux of their connection, and in my opinion, the crux of the young Sherlock series as a whole. Moriarty is the most interesting character in young Sherlock, both on his own and as a reference to what he becomes. My name is John Sage, and thanks for watching.